Breaking news now: during the mutiny, Prigozhin was betrayed by Wagner's deputy. According to a report, Wagner mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin was betrayed last month by his second-in-command Andrei Troshev, who did not support the leader's brief mutiny against Moscow. According to the Wagner sources cited by the investigative website Gulagu.net, Mr. Troshev gained the favor of Russian President Vladimir Putin by being the first Wagner commander to refuse to take part in the armed rebellion and instead provide information to the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, and the Russian Ministry of Defense, MOD. It came as Volodymyr Zelensky's troops drove out Moscow's forces from villages in the south, and as Russia launched drone attacks overnight on the south and east of Ukraine. According to the mayor of Mykolaiv, a fire broke out in one of the port's facilities, late on Monday. Ukraine can now reach the Black Sea through this major port city. It's quite serious, Alexander Senkovich, the mayor, said of the blaze. The Ukrainian Air Force warned on Telegram that Russian drones posed a threat to the cities of Odessa, Mykolaiv, Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Dnipropetrovsk in the country's south. Brief outline: a complicated situation in the east, according to Ukraine, and some successes in the south. Ukraine's south and east are targets of Russian drone attacks and missile strikes. Russia claims a Ukrainian drone raid over Crimea was thwarted. Ukraine says Russian troop levels in Kharkiv are comparable to the Soviet era. Putin threatens retaliation for the bridge attack in Crimea. What's at stake with the Black Sea grain agreement's expiration? Since Sunday, when drones began attacking the area, Russia has stopped allowing cargo ships to pass through the Kerch Strait, which links the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. According to Reuters, it followed drone attacks on the Crimean city of Sevastopol. Russian forces allegedly destroyed 7 aerial and 2 maritime drones on Sunday, thwarting an attack on Sevastopol by the Ukrainian military. The Kerch Strait Bridge, also known as the Kursk Bridge, came under attack on Monday. Top major American oilfield service providers supplied Russia with millions of dollars worth of equipment in the months following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, keeping a vital part of Russia's economy afloat even as Western nations imposed sanctions designed to starve the Russian war effort. SLB, formerly Schlumberger, the largest, kept going strong and even expanded slightly even as its competitors faded away. It made the decision to halt exports to Russia on a Friday, just as the Associated Press was getting ready to release a report on the company's activities in the country. In the year following the invasion that began in February 2022, Russia imported over 5,500 items from the top 5 U.S. firms in the sector, led by SLB, Baker Hughes, and Halliburton, totaling over $200 million. That's what the AP says, based on data from customs that B4 Ukraine obtained. It was deeply shocking to find a U.S. company continuing to supply equipment to Russia's oil and gas sector, said Eleanor Nikol, executive director of B4 Ukraine, a coalition of more than 80 non-profits calling for multinationals to leave the Russian market. Kyiv, Ukraine will host the World Healthcare Summit from November 7 to 9, 2023. The event is being co-hosted by August Mission, a humanitarian nonprofit, and Jansz Corporation, a worldwide provider of medical equipment. Trauma from the battlefield, hemorrhagic shock, traumatic brain injuries, transport, etc., hospital care, surgery, drugs, medical equipment, and recovery, prosthetics, mental health, will all be topics of conversation. Expert panels will be convened to discuss wartime lessons learned, and share their insights. On Tuesday, the Russian parliament voted to allow men to be called up for military service at an age at least 5 years later than before, all the way up to the age of 70 for the highest-ranking officers. Russia's war in Ukraine has been much longer and more attritional than Moscow had expected, and shows no sign of ending, so the country announced its first mobilization since World War II last September, calling up more than 300,000 former soldiers in an often chaotic emergency draft. Already, it has made it much more difficult for young men to avoid the draft by dodging recruiters handing out call-up papers, and it has raised the age limit for men to be called up for compulsory military service to 30 from 27. The State Duma, or lower house of parliament, announced on its website that the law passed on Tuesday allows men who have completed their mandatory service without any further commitment to be mobilized up to the age of 40, 50, or 55, depending on their category. The minimum age requirement was increased by 5 years in all cases. As a result of the new legislation, the reserve's highest-ranking members can be recalled for active duty until age 70 instead of 65, other senior ranks until age 60, junior officers until age 60, and everyone else until age 55 instead of 45. According to Reuters sources, the United States plans to publicly commit to spending $1.3 billion on military aid for Ukraine in the coming days. One of the officials said that the weapon package includes air defenses, anti-drone systems, exploding drones, and ammunition. Joe Biden's administration is using funds from the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative (USAI) program to purchase weapons from industry rather than depleting existing U.S. weapons stocks. The timing of the weapons and systems delivery is uncertain, and Reuters noted that the bundle's contents and value could shift up until the announcement. Since September, the Pentagon has dispersed over $10.8 billion across 7 USAI security aid packages for Ukraine. According to the report, Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin was betrayed last month by his second-in-command Andrei Troshev, who did not support the brief mutiny. Sources at the now former Wagner headquarters told the Russian investigative website Gulagu.net that Mr. Troshev gained Putin's favor by being the first Wagner commander to refuse to take part in the armed rebellion and instead transfer inside information to the FSB and Russian Defense Ministry. These allegations surface after an interview published in the Russian newspaper Kommersant in which Vladimir Putin made it sound like he had offered Wagner fighters a chance to continue serving under Vladimir Troshev. He told the paper, they could have all gathered in one place and continued to serve. They wouldn't be any different now. The same person who has been their true leader from the start would be in charge of them. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar has stated that he does not believe Russia's termination of the Black Sea grain deal will affect grocery price increases. The Kremlin has announced that it will suspend the agreement until its demands for increased food and fertilizer exports from Russia to the rest of the world are met. Mr. Varadkar said, "I don't think we're at that point yet," on the second day of an EU summit in Brussels. There was an initial spike in energy costs and a subsequent spike in food costs when the conflict in Ukraine broke out, but we have since found ways to mitigate these effects and adapt to them, such as by switching to alternative energy sources. So, I don't anticipate another inflationary spike as a result of this, but we do need to address it. Grain can also leave Ukraine via other routes, such as those passing through Romania and Poland. If the Russians keep up this policy, we'll have to figure out how to get the grain and fertilizer out of the country in some other way. Russia's actions are morally reprehensible. They will have repercussions far beyond the borders of Ukraine and into the world's poorest regions. The people of Latin America, the Caribbean, and, by extension, Africa and Asia, will be the hardest hit by Russia's recent decision, and I'm here to speak with their governments and leaders. We need to figure out a way to get the grain out of Ukraine through European ports despite their recent actions. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar arrived at the summit on Tuesday and stated that the communiqué needed to be very clear on Ukraine. This is a war of aggression. There were discussions on the language until late last night, and in the end, almost every country agreed to a text that expressly backed Ukraine's right to independence and freedom. Just a few managed to hold out. Let's check in again in the morning, he suggested. He also noted that, it is sometimes better to have no conclusions at all than to have language that doesn't mean anything, but that they were still far from that point. However, Xavier Bettel, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, has stated that the statement cannot be used to rewrite history. He told reporters, "We have to face the reality. Russia aggressively invaded Ukraine. Some countries, he suggested, might object to the statement's language regarding Ukraine. Even now, we can make a remark to the effect that virtually all nations recognize the language. It's unfortunate that we can't come to terms, but I'm not here to rewrite history. Alberto Van Clavern, Chile's foreign minister, expressed his country's regret over the conflict. He expressed his group's deep regret and surprise at the existence of those who would vote against a resolution to end the conflict in Ukraine, saying, "We're very sorry for the situation really. The position of Chile is that this is an aggressive war. Some Latin American countries resisted EU pressure for a clear condemnation of Russia as leaders from the EU, Latin America, and the Caribbean struggled to agree on a joint statement on Tuesday regarding the conflict in Ukraine.